The moment I saw her, I knew something was off. She was just a little girl no older than 6, with wide, innocent eyes that seemed to look right through me. Her name was Lily, and my husband Mark had brought her home with a story that didn't quite add up. "She's the daughter of an old friend," Mark had said, his voice calm but his eyes avoiding mine. "Her mom's going through a rough patch and she needs someone to take care of Lily for a while." I stood there in the doorway, my arms crossed, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Why us?" I asked, my voice tinged with suspicion. "Don't they have family or closer friends who could help?" Mark shrugged, his usual confident demeanor slightly faltering. "They don't have anyone else. I promised I'd help. You know how much I value loyalty." I wanted to believe him, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. Mark had always been a man of his word, but this felt different. Still, I couldn't bring myself to say no to a child in need. "Fine," I said reluctantly, stepping aside to let them in. "But this is temporary, Mark. We're not running a daycare." He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Of course, Sarah. Just until her mom gets back on her feet." As Lily walked past me, I couldn't help but notice how much she resembled Mark. The same dark hair, the same sharp jawline. It was uncanny, but I brushed it off as a coincidence. After all, Mark had said she was a friend's daughter. Why would he lie about something like that? But as the days turned into weeks, I started to notice things, little things that didn't add up. Mark would take late-night calls, whispering in hushed tones before abruptly hanging up when I entered the room. He'd disappear for hours at a time, claiming he was running errands, but I could tell he was hiding something. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, she looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Why doesn't Daddy love me like he loves you?" My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's always so busy," she said, her voice small. "And he never stays long when he visits." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Visits?" I repeated, my mind racing. "What do you mean, visits?" But before she could answer, Mark walked in, his face pale. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's going on, Mark?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "What aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and Lily. "It's not what you think," he said finally, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The days turned into a strange routine. Lily became a part of our lives, her presence both a joy and a constant reminder of the unease I couldn't shake. She was a sweet child, quiet and well-behaved, but there was something about her that felt off. Maybe it was the way she looked at Mark, her eyes lighting up whenever he walked into the room, or the way she hesitated to call me Mom, even though I'd told her it was okay. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to be changing. He was more distant, more secretive. He'd always been a private person, but this was different. He'd disappear into his study for hours, locking the door behind him. When I asked him about it, he'd brush me off with a vague excuse about work. "You've been working a lot lately," I said one evening as we sat at the dinner table. Lily was in the living room, coloring quietly, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. Mark didn't look up from his plate. "It's a busy time," he said, his voice tight. "You know how it is." I frowned, pushing my food around with my fork. "I just feel like you're avoiding me. Like there's something you're not telling me." For a moment he was silent. Then he set his fork down and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, you're overthinking this. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. I could feel it in the way he avoided my gaze, in the way he tensed whenever I brought up Lily or her mother. Something was wrong, and I was determined to find out what. That night, after Mark had gone to bed, I found myself standing in front of his study door. It was locked as usual, but I had a key. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never invaded his privacy like this before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know what he was hiding. The lock clicked softly as I turned the key, and I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting Mark to appear behind me. But the house was silent, save for the faint sound of Lily's breathing from the guest room. The study was neat and orderly, just like Mark. His desk was cluttered with papers and files, but one thing caught my eye immediately: a photo frame face down on the corner of the desk. My hands trembled as I picked it up and turned it over. It was a picture of Mark with a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. They were standing close, her hand resting on his arm, and the look on his face, It wasn't the look of someone who saw her as just a friend. My stomach churned as I set the photo down, my mind racing. Who is she? And why did Mark have a picture of her hidden in his study? Before I could think too much about it, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but it was just Lily, standing in the doorway with her bunny clutched tightly to her chest. "Sarah," she asked, her voice small and sleepy. "What are you doing?" I forced a smile, though my hands were still shaking. "Just tidying up," I said, quickly setting the photo back where I'd found it. "You should be in bed, sweetheart." She nodded, rubbing her eyes with one hand. "I had a bad dream," she said. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" I hesitated, glancing back at the photo. There were so many questions swirling in my mind, but right now Lily needed me. "Of course," I said, holding out my hand. "Let's go." As we walked back to the bedroom, I couldn't shake the image of the woman in the photo. Who is she? And what did she mean to Mark? But the biggest question of all was one I didn't want to face. What did this mean for us? The next morning I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Lily was still asleep beside me, her small hand clutching the edge of my sleeve. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake her, and tiptoed out of the room. My mind was racing, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this go. I needed answers. Mark was already gone, off to work before the sun had even risen. That was nothing new. He'd been leaving early and coming home late for weeks now. But today his absence felt like a glaring red flag. I glanced at the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. I had time. I grabbed my phone and opened the browser, typing in the name of the woman from the photo. I didn't know her last name, but I remembered the cafe in the background of the picture. It was a small, cozy place called The Rustic Bean, just a few blocks from Mark's office. Maybe someone there would recognize her. After dropping Lily off at school, I drove to the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The place was exactly as it looked in the photo, quaint and charming with a warm, inviting atmosphere. I walked in, the bell above the door jingling softly, and took a seat at the counter. The barista, a young woman with bright pink hair and a nose ring, smiled at me. "What can I get you?" "Just a coffee, please," I said, forcing a smile. As she prepared my drink, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken of Mark and the woman. "I was wondering if you've seen this woman before. She's a friend of mine, and I'm trying to surprise her." The barista glanced at the photo, her expression shifting slightly. "Oh yeah, I know her. That's Emily. She comes in here all the time with her boyfriend, I guess? That guy in the photo." My stomach dropped. "Boyfriend?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The barista nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Yeah, they're here a lot. Super cute couple. Why, is something wrong?" I shook my head quickly, forcing another smile. No, nothing's wrong. Thanks for your help." I left the cafe without touching my coffee, my mind spinning. Emily. Her name was Emily, and she was Mark's girlfriend? The word felt like a punch to the gut. How long had this been going on? And how could I have been so blind? As I drove home, I tried to piece together everything I knew. Mark's late nights, his secretive behavior, the way he'd brought Lily into our lives without so much as a discussion. It all made sense now, and yet it didn't. How could he do this to me? To us? When I got home, I went straight to Mark's study. This time I didn't hesitate. I tore through his desk drawers, searching for anything that might give me more information. And then I found it, a stack of letters tied together with a ribbon. My hands trembled as I untied it and began to read. The letters were from Emily, each one more intimate than the last. They spoke of a love that had been going on for years, of a child they shared, of a future they were planning together. And then I saw it, the name at the bottom of one of the letters. Love always, Emily and Lily. My breath caught in my throat. Lily. Their daughter. Mark had been raising his own child with another woman right under my nose. And he'd lied to me about it. I sank to the floor, the letters spilling out of my hands. My heart was pounding, my vision blurred with tears. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me like this? But even as the pain threatened to consume me, a fire began to burn in my chest. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. He'd made a fool of me, but I wasn't going to sit back and take it. He was going to pay for what he'd done. The next morning I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Lily was still asleep beside me, her small hand clutching the edge of my sleeve. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake her, and tiptoed out of the room. My mind was racing and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this go. I needed answers. Mark was already gone, off to work before the sun had even risen. That was nothing new. He'd been leaving early and coming home late for weeks now. But today his absence felt like a glaring red flag. I glanced at the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. I had time. I grabbed my phone and opened the browser, typing in the name of the woman from the photo. I didn't know her last name, but I remembered the cafe in the background of the picture. It was a small, cozy place called the Rustic Bean, just a few blocks from Mark's office. Maybe someone there would recognize her. After dropping Lily off at school, I drove to the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The place was exactly as it looked in the photo, quaint and charming with a warm, inviting atmosphere. I walked in, the bell above the door jingling softly, and took a seat at the counter. The barista, a young woman with bright pink hair and a nose ring, smiled at me. "What can I get you?" "Just a coffee, please," I said, forcing a smile. As she prepared my drink, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo I'd taken of Mark and the woman. "I was wondering if you've seen this woman before. She's a friend of mine and I'm trying to surprise her." The barista glanced at the photo, her expression shifting slightly. "Oh yeah, I know her. That's Emily. She comes in here all the time with her boyfriend, I guess? That guy in the photo." My stomach dropped. "Boyfriend?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. The barista nodded, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Yeah, they're here a lot. Super cute couple. Why, is something wrong?" I shook my head quickly, forcing another smile. No, nothing's wrong. Thanks for your help." I left the cafe without touching my coffee, my mind spinning. Emily. Her name was Emily, and she was Mark's girlfriend? The word felt like a punch to the gut. How long had this been going on? And how could I have been so blind? As I drove home, I tried to piece together everything I knew. Mark's late nights, his secretive behavior, the way he'd brought Lily into our lives without so much as a discussion. It all made sense now, and yet it didn't. How could he do this to me? To us? When I got home, I went straight to Mark's study. This time I didn't hesitate. I tore through his desk drawers, searching for anything that might give me more information. And then I found it, a stack of letters tied together with a ribbon. My hands trembled as I untied it and began to read. The letters were from Emily, each one more intimate than the last. They spoke of a love that had been going on for years, of a child they shared, of a future they were planning together. And then I saw it, the name at the bottom of one of the letters. "Love always, Emily and Lily." My breath caught in my throat. Lily. Their daughter. Mark had been raising his own child with another woman right under my nose. And he'd lied to me about it. I sank to the floor, the letters spilling out of my hands. My heart was pounding, my vision blurred with tears. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me like this? But even as the pain threatened to consume me, a fire began to burn in my chest. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. He'd made a fool of me, but I wasn't going to sit back and take it. He was going to pay for what he'd done. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, the letters from Emily burning a hole in my mind. Every word, every detail played on a loop in my head. Mark had been living a double life and I had been the fool who trusted him. But no more. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. When Mark came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room, the letters spread out on the coffee table in front of me. Lily was in her room, thankfully occupied with a coloring book. I didn't want her to see what was about to happen. Mark walked in, his tie loosened and his suit jacket slung over one arm. He froze when he saw me, his eyes darting to the letters on the table. For a moment he just stood there, his face pale and his mouth slightly open. Then he forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "What's all this?" I didn't smile back. "You tell me, Mark," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Who's Emily? And why does she keep writing you love letters about your daughter?" His smile faltered and he set his jacket down on the back of the couch. "Sarah, let's not do this here," he said, his tone pleading. "Not in front of Lily." "Lily's in her room," I snapped. "And don't you dare use her as an excuse. You've been lying to me for years, Mark. Years. How could you do this to me? To us?" He ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice rising. Emily and I, it's complicated. But I love you, Sarah. You have to believe me. Complicated. I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You have a child with another woman, Mark. That's not complicated, that's betrayal. And you brought her into our home, into my life, and expected me to just, what? Play along. He took a step toward me, his hands outstretched as if he could somehow fix this with a touch. Sarah, please, he said, his voice desperate now. I never meant to hurt you. I was going to tell you, I swear. I didn't know how. I stepped back out of his reach. Don't, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare try to justify this. You lied to me, Mark. You lied to me every single day. And you made me raise your child like she was some charity case. How could you do that? How could you be so selfish? He flinched, his face twisting with guilt. I didn't know what else to do, he said, his voice breaking. Emily wasn't ready to be a mother, and I couldn't just abandon Lily. But I thought you'd understand. Understand. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. You thought I'd understand that you were cheating on me and hiding a child from me? What kind of person do you think I am? He didn't answer, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. I could feel the tears building in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not now. Get out, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. What? I said get out, I repeated louder this time. I don't want you here. I don't want to see you. Not tonight. Not ever. He stared at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Sarah, you don't mean that, he said, his voice trembling. We can fix this. We can work through it. No, Mark, I said, my voice firm. We can't. You broke us. And I'm not going to let you break me any more than you already have. For a long moment he just stood there, his shoulders slumped and his eyes filled with regret. Then without a word he turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the silence. I sank onto the couch, my legs giving out beneath me. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, as the weight of everything crashed down on me. But even as I cried, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally stood up to him. I had finally taken control. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mark thought he could walk away from this unscathed, but he was wrong. He had made a fool of me, and now it was my turn to make him pay. The house felt emptier after Mark left, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. My mind was already racing, piecing together a plan. Mark had hurt me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. He thought he could walk out that door and leave me to pick up the pieces, but he was wrong. I was going to make sure he regretted every lie, every betrayal. First, I needed to protect Lily. She was innocent in all of this, and I couldn't let her suffer because of Mark's mistakes. I went to her room where she was still coloring quietly, her stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. She looked up at me with those big blue eyes, and my heart ached for her. Hey, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. How are you doing? She shrugged, her small shoulders lifting and falling. Okay, she said softly. Is Daddy coming back? I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. He's taking a little break, I said carefully. But don't worry, I'm here for you, okay? No matter what. She nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. I sat down beside her and picked up a crayon, joining her in coloring for a while. It was a small comfort, but it helped calm the storm inside me. Once Lily was asleep, I got to work. I started by gathering all the evidence I could find. The letters from Emily, the photo from Mark's study, even the receipts from his late-night outings. I scanned everything and saved it to a secure folder on my computer. If Mark thought he could deny any of this, he was in for a rude awakening. Next, I reached out to a lawyer. I didn't know much about divorce proceedings, but I knew I needed someone on my side who did. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, listened patiently as I explained the situation. This is a tough situation, she said when I finished. But you've got a strong case. Adultery, deception, and emotional manipulation. These are all things we can use to your advantage. The fact that he brought his child into your home without your knowledge is particularly damning. Good, I said, my voice firm. I want to make sure he doesn't walk away from this unscathed. Claire nodded. We'll make sure of it. But you need to be prepared for a fight. Men like Mark don't give up easily. I'm ready, I said, though my stomach churned at the thought of what was to come. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of determination. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. Mark had taken so much from me, but he wasn't going to take my future. The next morning, I dropped Lily off at school and then drove to Emily's apartment. I didn't know what I was going to say to her, but I needed to see her face to face. I needed to understand how she could be a part of this. Emily answered the door after a few moments, her blonde hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She looked surprised to see me but not entirely shocked. "Sarah," she said, her voice cautious. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "About Mark. About Lily. About everything." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. Her apartment was small but stylish, with minimalist decor and a few personal touches. Photos of Lily, a vase of fresh flowers, and a bookshelf filled with novels. It was a space that felt both intimate and transient, much like her relationship with Mark. We sat down on the couch and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then Emily broke the silence. "I'm guessing you know everything," she said, her voice quiet. "I know enough," I said, my voice tight. "What I don't understand is why. Why did you let him do this? Why did you let him bring Lily into my life without telling me the truth?" Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't want to," she said, her voice filled with regret. "But Mark, he can be very persuasive. He told me it was the only way, that you'd never understand. I wanted to tell you, Sarah. I really did. But I was scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, my voice rising. "Scared of me? Or scared of losing him?" She didn't answer, and for a moment the room was silent. Then she looked at me, her pale blue eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to be angry with her, to blame her for everything. But as I looked at her, I realized she was just as much a victim in this as I was. Mark had manipulated us both, playing us against each other to get what he wanted. We're not going to let him win," I said finally, my voice firm. "Not this time." Emily looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean we're going to expose him," I said. "For everything he's done. He's not going to get away with this. Not if we stand together." For a long moment, Emily just stared at me. Then she nodded, a determined look in her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." Emily and I spent the next few hours talking, piecing together the timeline of Mark's lies. She told me everything. How they'd met years ago, how their relationship had started as a casual affair but deepened when she became pregnant with Lily. Mark had promised her the world, but when it came time to leave me, he'd hesitated. Instead, he'd convinced her to let him bring Lily into our home, claiming it was the only way to give their daughter a stable life. "He said you'd never accept the truth," Emily said, her voice trembling. "He told me you'd leave him if you found out, and then Lily would grow up without a father. I didn't want that for her, so I agreed. But I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. I swear." I believed her. It was clear that Mark had manipulated us both, playing on our fears and insecurities to keep us under his control. But now that we were working together, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. We were going to take him down, and he wouldn't see it coming. Over the next few days, Emily and I gathered more evidence. She gave me access to her emails and text messages with Mark, which were filled with promises and excuses. We also dug into his financial records, discovering that he'd been funneling money into a secret account for Emily and Lily. It was all there, proof of his double life, his lies, and his betrayal. But the most damning evidence came from Lily herself. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with those big blue eyes and said, "Sarah, are you mad at Daddy?" My heart ached at the question. "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not mad at Daddy. He's sad. But it's not your fault, okay? You didn't do anything wrong." She nodded, though she still looked unsure. Then she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. "Daddy gave me this," she said, handing it to me. "He said to keep it safe." I unfolded the paper, my hands trembling as I read the words written in Mark's familiar handwriting. It was a list of dates and amounts, payments he'd made to Emily over the years. At the bottom he'd written a note, "For Lily's future." Don't let Sarah find out. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm for Lily's sake. Thank you for showing me this, I said, tucking the paper into my pocket. You're such a brave girl, you know that? She smiled faintly, her eyes already drooping with sleep. I love you, Sarah, she murmured. I love you too, sweetheart, I said, kissing her forehead. Now get some rest. As I left her room, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Mark had tried to hide his secrets, but he'd underestimated me. He'd underestimated us. The next morning I met with Claire again, this time with Emily by my side. We laid out all the evidence we'd gathered. The letters, the financial records, the note from Lily. Claire's eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. This is incredible, she said, her voice filled with a mix of shock and admiration. With this, we can not only secure a favorable divorce settlement but also potentially press charges for fraud and emotional abuse. Mark won't know what hit him. Good, I said, my voice steady. That's exactly what I want. Emily nodded in agreement, though she looked a little overwhelmed. What about Lily? She asked. I don't want her to get caught in the middle of all this. We'll make sure she's protected, Claire assured her. Custody arrangements can be tricky, but given the circumstances, I think we have a strong case for joint custody between the two of you. Mark's involvement will be limited, to say the least. I felt a flicker of relief at that. Despite everything, I couldn't imagine my life without Lily. She'd become a part of me, and I wasn't going to let Mark take her away. As we left Claire's office, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said, for not hating me. For giving me a chance to make this right. I nodded, though it was still hard to fully trust her. This isn't just about us, I said. It's about Lily. She deserves better than this. She does, Emily agreed. And we're going to make sure she gets it. The plan was set. Claire had advised us to confront Mark in a controlled environment, somewhere he couldn't easily escape or manipulate the situation. We decided to host a dinner at our house, inviting both Mark and Emily under the guise of a family meeting to discuss Lily's future. Mark didn't suspect a thing. He thought this was his chance to smooth things over, to regain control. Little did he know we were about to flip the script. The evening of the dinner, I was a bundle of nerves. I moved around the kitchen, preparing the meal with trembling hands, while Emily sat at the table sipping a glass of wine. Lily was upstairs, playing in her room, blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. Do you think he'll try to deny it? Emily asked, breaking the silence. Probably, I said, stirring a pot of pasta sauce more vigorously than necessary. But it doesn't matter. We have the evidence. He can't talk his way out of this. Emily nodded, though she still looked uneasy. I don't want this to get ugly. For Lily's sake. It's already ugly, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. But we're going to get through it. For her. Before Emily could respond, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat and I set the spoon down, wiping my hands on a towel. That's him, I said, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. I opened the door to find Mark standing there, looking as polished and confident as ever. He was holding a bottle of wine, a peace offering, no doubt. His smile faltered slightly when he saw Emily sitting at the table, but he quickly recovered. Sarah, he said, stepping inside. Emily. I wasn't expecting to see you here. I invited her, I said, my voice calm but firm. We have a lot to discuss. Mark's eyes darted between us, his smile fading. Okay, he said slowly. What's going on? Let's sit down, I said, gesturing to the table. Dinner's ready. We sat in tense silence as I served the food, the clink of silverware against plates the only sound in the room. Mark kept glancing at Emily, clearly trying to gauge the situation, but she avoided his gaze, focusing on her meal. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I set my fork down and looked at Mark, my expression hard. We know the truth, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. About you and Emily. About Lily. Mark froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. For a moment he just stared at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Then he set his fork down and leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to one of calm defiance. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice steady. Don't, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Don't insult me by lying again. We have the letters, the financial records, even the note you gave Lily. We know everything, Mark. And we're done playing your games. His composure cracked and he slammed his hand down on the table, making the plates rattle. You had no right to go through my things, he shouted, his face red with anger. I had every right. I shot back, my voice rising to match his. You brought another woman's child into our home and expected me to just accept it. You lied to me, Mark. You betrayed me. And now you're going to face the consequences. Mark looked at Emily, his eyes pleading. Emily, tell her, he said, his voice desperate. Tell her this isn't what she thinks. Emily shook her head, her expression resolute. It's over, Mark, she said. We're done letting you control us. We're done letting you hurt us. Mark stared at her, his face pale, then turned back to me. Sarah, please, he said, his voice trembling. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. We can fix this. No, Mark, I said, my voice cold and final. We can't. You broke us. And now you're going to pay for what you've done. For a long moment the room was silent, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. Then Mark stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Both of you. I doubt it, I said, standing to face him. Now get out of my house. He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and Emily, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house, a final punctuation to the end of our marriage. I sank back into my chair, my legs trembling, and let out a shaky breath. Emily reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. We did it, she said, her voice filled with relief. It's over. Not yet, I said, though I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. But it will be soon. The days that followed the dinner were a whirlwind of emotions. Mark's departure left a void in the house, but it was a void I was determined to fill with strength and resolve. Emily and I had formed an unlikely alliance, and together, we were ready to face whatever came next. The first step was to file for divorce. Claire had already begun drafting the paperwork, and with the evidence we'd gathered, she was confident we could secure a favorable settlement. But the legal battle was only part of the fight. The emotional toll was just as daunting. Lily, of course, was at the center of it all. She was too young to fully understand what was happening, but she could sense the tension in the air. She started asking more questions about where Mark had gone, why he wasn't coming home, and why Emily was spending so much time with us. Is Daddy mad at me? She asked one evening, her voice small and uncertain. My heart broke at the question. I knelt down in front of her, taking her tiny hands in mine. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Daddy's not mad at you. He's just going through some things right now. But no matter what happens, I'm here for you. And so is Emily. We love you very much. She nodded, though she still looked unsure. Okay, she said softly. I love you too, Sarah. I pulled her into a tight hug, blinking back tears. No matter how much Mark had hurt me, I couldn't let his mistakes hurt Lily. She deserved better, and I was going to make sure she got it. Meanwhile, Mark wasn't going down without a fight. He started calling and texting, trying to manipulate me into dropping the divorce. At first, his messages were pleading, filled with apologies and promises to change. But when that didn't work, they turned angry and accusatory. You're making a mistake, Sarah, one text read. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. I knew better than to engage with him. But his words still stung, a reminder of the control he'd once had over me. Emily, to her credit, was a rock during this time. She helped me stay focused, reminding me of why we were doing this. He's scared, she said one evening as we sat in the living room, Lily asleep upstairs. He's losing control and he doesn't know how to handle it. But we're stronger than he is. We've got this. I nodded, though I still felt a flicker of doubt. What if he tries to take Lily? I asked, voicing my biggest fear. What if he fights for custody? Emily's expression hardened. He won't win, she said. Not with everything we have on him. But even if he tries, we'll fight back. Together. Her words gave me comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Mark wasn't the type to give up easily, and I knew he'd do whatever it took to regain control. That fear was confirmed a few days later when I received a letter from his lawyer. It was a formal response to the divorce filing, filled with counterclaims and accusations. Mark was trying to paint me as unstable, unfit to care for Lily. He even claimed that Emily was a bad influence, using her past mistakes against her. I felt a surge of anger as I read the letter, my hands trembling. "How dare he?" I muttered, tossing the letter onto the table. "After everything he's done, he has the nerve to try and turn this around on us?" Emily picked up the letter, her eyes scanning the words. "He's desperate," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But this is just noise. We have the evidence. We have the truth. And we're not going to let him intimidate us." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "You're right," I said. "We're not going to let him win." But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Mark had already shown how far he was willing to go to protect his secrets. And now that those secrets were out, I had no doubt he'd fight even harder to keep what he thought was his. The custody battle was brutal. Mark pulled out all the stops, using every resource at his disposal to try and discredit me. His lawyers painted me as unstable, unfit to care for Lily, and even accused me of alienating her from him. They brought up every mistake I'd ever made, every moment of weakness, and twisted it to fit their narrative. But I wasn't alone. Emily stood by my side, her testimony a powerful counter to Mark's lies. She spoke openly about how he'd manipulated her, how he'd used her love for Lily to control her. And then there was the evidence. The letters, the financial records, the note Mark had given Lily. It was all there, laid out for the judge to see. The courtroom was tense as the judge reviewed the case. Mark sat on the other side of the room, his face a mask of calm confidence, but I could see the cracks in his facade. He wasn't used to losing control, and it was eating away at him. Finally, the judge spoke. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing testimony from both parties, it is clear that Mr. Mark Thompson has engaged in a pattern of deceit and manipulation. His actions have caused significant emotional harm to both Ms. Sarah Thompson and Ms. Emily Carter, as well as to the child in question, Lily Thompson." I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I am granting full custody of Lily Thompson to Ms. Sarah Thompson, with visitation rights for Ms. Emily Carter. Mr. Thompson's visitation rights will be limited and supervised, given the evidence of his manipulative behavior." I felt a surge of relief, tears welling up in my eyes. We'd done it. We'd won. But Mark wasn't ready to give up. As soon as the judge left the room, he turned to me, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll get Lily back. You'll see." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze with a steely resolve. "You can try," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But you'll lose. Again." He glared at me for a moment longer, then turned on his heel and stormed out of the courtroom. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of triumph and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life turning out, but I knew I'd made the right choice. Emily came up beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "Lily's safe now." I nodded, blinking back tears. "She is," I said. "And so are we." With the custody battle behind us, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Lily, Emily, and I formed an unconventional but loving family unit. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments of tension and awkwardness as we navigated our new dynamic. But over time we found our footing. Lily thrived in the stability we provided. She was still too young to fully understand the complexities of what had happened, but she could sense the love and care that surrounded her. Emily and I made a conscious effort to put our differences aside and focus on what was best for her. We became a team, united by our shared love for Lily and our determination to give her the life she deserved. Mark, true to his word, didn't give up easily. He filed appeal after appeal, each one more desperate than the last. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and his efforts only served to reinforce the judge's decision. Eventually, his visits became less frequent and his presence in our lives faded to a distant memory. In the meantime, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I started a new job, something I'd put on hold during the chaos of the divorce. It was a fresh start, a chance to reclaim my independence and rediscover who I was outside of my relationship with Mark. Emily, too, began to carve out a new path for herself. She enrolled in night classes, determined to build a better future for herself and Lily. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Lily play in the yard, Emily turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't stood up to him?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, I said. Because I know exactly what would have happened. We'd still be living in his shadow, letting him control our lives. And Lily, she'd be caught in the middle of it all. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. I'm glad we did this, she said. For her. For us. Me too, I said, smiling faintly. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. As the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the yard, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out stronger on the other side. And as I watched Lily laugh and play, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly in her arms, I knew we'd made the right choice. But even as I savored the moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Mark was still out there, and I knew he wasn't the type to let go easily. Sooner or later he'd try to insert himself back into our lives. And when he did, I'd be ready. For a while life was peaceful. Lily continued to thrive, her laughter filling the house and her curiosity about the world growing every day. Emily and I settled into a comfortable routine, balancing work, parenting, and our own personal growth. It felt like we'd finally turned a corner, leaving the chaos of the past behind us. But deep down I knew better. Mark wasn't the type to fade quietly into the background. He'd made that clear during the custody battle, and I had no doubt he was still scheming, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came one rainy afternoon. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an unknown sender, and the subject line sent a chill down my spine. You think you've won? Think again. I opened the email, my hands trembling. It was from Mark. The message was short but menacing. You took everything from me. Now I'm going to take it back. Starting with Lily. My heart raced as I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. What did he mean? Was he planning to kidnap her? Hurt her? I didn't know, but I couldn't take any chances. I immediately called Emily, my voice shaking as I relayed the email. We need to be careful, I said. He's not going to let this go. Emily's voice was calm but firm. We'll keep her safe, she said. No matter what. That evening we sat down with Lily and had a difficult conversation. We explained that Mark might try to see her, but that he wasn't allowed to be around her without us there. She listened quietly, her big blue eyes filled with confusion and fear. Is Daddy bad? She asked, her voice small. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Daddy made some bad choices, I said carefully. And until he can make better ones, we need to keep you safe. Okay. She nodded, though she still looked unsure. Okay, she said softly. Over the next few days we tightened security around the house. We installed cameras, changed the locks, and made sure Lily was never left alone. It was exhausting, but we couldn't afford to let our guard down. Then one evening the storm broke. I was putting Lily to bed when I heard a noise downstairs. A faint creak, like someone was trying to be quiet. My heart leapt into my throat, and I quickly locked Lily's door before grabbing my phone and creeping downstairs. The living room was dark, but I could see a shadow moving near the window. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, my voice barely above a whisper as I gave the dispatcher our address. Before I could say anything else, the shadow lunged at me. I dropped the phone and stumbled back, my heart pounding as I recognized Mark's face in the dim light. You thought you could keep her from me? He snarled, his eyes wild with anger. She's my daughter, Sarah. Mine. I backed away, my mind racing. Mark, don't do this, I said, my voice shaking. You'll only make things worse. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Worse? How could things possibly get worse? You've already taken everything from me. Before I could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Mark's eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like a cornered animal. Then he turned and bolted out the back door, disappearing into the night. The police arrived moments later, but Mark was long gone. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols in the area, but I knew it wasn't enough. Mark was desperate, and desperate people did desperate things. As I sat on the couch, my hands still trembling, Emily came downstairs, her face pale with worry. Is everything okay? She asked. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. He was here, I said, my voice breaking. He tried to take her. Emily sat down beside me, pulling me into a tight hug. We'll keep her safe, she said, her voice firm. No matter what it takes. I nodded, though I couldn't shake the fear that gripped me. Mark wasn't going to stop. Not until he got what he wanted. And I wasn't sure how much longer we could hold him off. The days following Mark's break-in were a blur of fear and vigilance. The police increased their presence around our neighborhood, but it wasn't enough to ease the constant knot of anxiety in my chest. Emily and I took turns staying up at night watching the security cameras and listening for any sign of movement. Lily, sensing the tension, became quieter, her usual laughter replaced by a wary silence. One evening as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide from me, Sarah. I'll always find you." My hands trembled as I read the message. Mark was escalating and I didn't know how much longer we could hold him off. I showed the text to Emily, her face hardening as she read it. "We need to end this," she said, her voice low and determined. "Once and for all." I nodded, though I wasn't sure how. Mark was like a shadow, always lurking just out of reach. But we couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over our shoulders, waiting for him to strike. The next morning I called Claire, my lawyer. "We need a restraining order," I said, my voice firm. "And we need it now." Claire agreed, and within hours we were in front of a judge presenting our case. The evidence was overwhelming: the emails, the texts, the break-in. The judge granted the restraining order without hesitation, but I knew it was only a piece of paper. It wouldn't stop Mark if he was determined enough. That night as I lay in bed I heard a noise outside. My heart leapt into my throat and I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But before I could dial, I heard a voice, Mark's voice, calling my name. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "I just want to talk. Please." I crept to the window, peering through the blinds. Mark was standing in the yard, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a man on the edge, his eyes wild and his hands trembling. "Go away, Mark," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You're not welcome here." "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I just want to see Lily. Just for a minute. I'll leave after that, I swear." I shook my head, though he couldn't see me. "No," I said. "You lost that right when you broke into our home. Now leave or I'll call the police." For a moment he just stood there, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Then without a word he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I sank to the floor, my hands trembling as I dialed the police. They arrived quickly, but Mark was already gone. They promised to keep an eye out, but I knew it wasn't enough. Mark wasn't going to stop. Not until he got what he wanted. The next morning I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Mark to strike. I needed to take control to end this once and for all. I called Claire again, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. "I want to press charges," I said. "For everything. The harassment, the break-in, the threats. I want him to face the consequences of what he's done." Claire agreed, and within days Mark was arrested. The trial was swift and brutal, the evidence against him overwhelming. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a small but significant victory. As I sat in the courtroom listening to the judge's verdict, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life turning out, but I knew I'd made the right choice. Mark had hurt me, betrayed me, and tried to control me. But in the end I'd taken back my life. As I left the courtroom, Emily and Lily were waiting for me. Lily ran up to me, her face filled with worry. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small. I knelt down, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's over," I said, my voice filled with relief. "He can't hurt us anymore." She nodded, her